you had a profound kind of insight years ago when you discovered Hadoop. Um, and I believe you were at Yale at the time. Can you tell us a little bit about kind of how you came up with the insight and then how you went about finding your future co-founders?
Yeah, so actually, so this was 2010 timeframe, and I had a software engineering background. I had an undergraduate degree in computer science, but I was actually getting my MBA at the time, and read a research paper written by a guy named Daniel Abadi, a young professor there, and his PhD student, Kamo Pawlikowski, and the paper was called Hadoop DB. And Hadoop was a pretty emerging technology, but what was so novel about this paper was really thinking about Hadoop as a database, as a DB, if you will. And that was really what the research was all about, was applying a SQL interface to allow you to do traditional data warehousing analytics, the types of things that you would have previously spent millions of dollars on with, Oracle or Teradata or IBM. You can now do very cost effectively and at a very great scale, leveraging Hadoop and this Hadoop DB concept, if you will. And so that led to my first company, which was really commercializing that research with Daniel and Camille. They became my co-founders. And we built that business over 4 years, ultimately being acquired actually by Teradata and spending some time there post-acquisition.
And you seem to have a knack for going right to the pioneering technology and forming a company around that and building that company, scaling that company. Let's head into now the founding story of Starburst.
Mhm. Yeah, so Starburst was really formulated, I would say, in that period post-acquisition from my first company, spending time at Teradata. My job at Teradata was actually to think about the future of data warehousing and look beyond the traditional data warehouse. So I have a lot of respect and appreciation for the leaders at the time that gave me this latitude to explore. It was sort of like they wanted me to try to help address the innovator's dilemma. I think Teradata is the classic innovator's dilemma story where the industry was changing around them. They were the leader, they were the pioneer in data warehousing, but the industry was transforming so quickly, and they needed to figure out how to address that. And so during my time there, I got to explore, and I was looking at open source technologies, cloud technologies, and that's really where I discovered this technology at Facebook that back then was called Presto. Today it's known as Trino, but it's an open source project that allows you to run analytics on data in a data lake, but also distributed data as well, data that lives in multiple data sources. And I thought that was a really interesting concept because one of my observations at Teradata was that despite them being the industry leader for a number of decades, they were like the snowflake before Snowflake, if you will. Not one of their customers actually had all of their data in Teradata. It just became impossible, and that was a lesson, born out of 30 years of experience, that Teradata had at that point. And so I thought, well, this technology could actually be the solution, the sort of unifier, by being able to provide connectivity to all of the data that an enterprise has, whether that's in a lake, a traditional database, a data warehouse, a NoSQL database, a cloud, on-prem. It was this sort of single point of access to all of your data. And that's what got me excited about it initially. And so me and a few members of my team ultimately left Teradata to form Starburst to really bring that idea to life and commercialize it.
What was the limitation at the time? Why wasn't a data company able to unify all different types of data, the comprehensive set?
It was really sort of antithetical to, I think, just the way that database companies had been built up to that point, which was partly technical, but partly business reason. And I'll explain what I mean by that. On the technical side, there was this belief that controlling your own storage and optimizing the storage was necessary to achieve great performance. And so all the databases that came before us had their own proprietary storage that was highly optimized for the query engine component. You can think of a database as really like two parts, the query component, the storage component. And those were always joined together and optimized for one another. And so the idea of breaking that apart and really allowing the query engine to access all types of storage was a new idea at the time. The other reason, the business reason, is that storage piece, that proprietary storage, actually creates lock-in, which is bad for customers but good for vendors. And so, if you think about the story of Oracle, quite frankly, it's a story of lock-in. I don't think there are many Oracle customers today, despite their recent stock performance, that would say, I love, my Oracle database and the fact that I can't get my data out of it. I think the reality is that lock-in is what has built such a big business for them, but it's also led customers to feel trapped. And I think that was also true in the data warehouse space. And it's part of what has driven, I think, a lot of the interest around open formats today, particularly formats like Iceberg, which have gained tremendous popularity.
Mm-hmm. So you mentioned Oracle and Iceberg, and I'm wondering if we can help give the audience some insight into the market landscape, like in where Starburst sits. Like, what is Starburst excellent at and outcompetes at, compared to others in the market?
Yeah, so I would say fundamentally, if you believe that Iceberg is or open formats in general, with Iceberg being kind of the leading contender there, that's where you want to store the majority of your data as much as you can, then you want to find a query engine that's well paired to work with those Iceberg tables. And really from Iceberg's first beginnings at Netflix, they were running our queries from Trino or Presto, as it was known before it, on those Iceberg tables. In fact, they were kind of made for each other, really. So there's a lot of history there in the open source community of these two technologies working together. And as a commercial company, we've really made that easier and faster and built out kind of the full end-to-end lifecycle from ingesting into Iceberg tables, either as files or streaming ingest, managing and optimizing those tables, and then of course querying them with our query engine. So that's one piece, and then I think the other piece is whether or not you believe that you will probably have data outside of the lake or outside of traditional data warehouses as well. And our belief, very much so, is that there will always be heterogeneity in the data landscape because there will always be these purpose-built systems. There will always be disparate teams creating their own piece of an architecture where the data at the end of the day is going to be valuable to either an analyst or now in the future AI agents that will need that context in conjunction with the other data in the enterprise. And that's again where I think we're uniquely positioned because of our federation capability, where we can join data from multiple data sources, and we can do that in a very secure and controlled way. It's one of the reasons that financial services, for example, happens to be one of our largest verticals. Today, we serve 10 of the 15 largest banks, and those banks are really the epitome of complexity. They have every possible data source you can imagine, and being able to move all of that data around, it becomes impractical. So being able to access and query it directly has a lot of benefits to that.
You have some fantastic investors backing the company. And I think you were very intentional about when you decided to bring in outside capital. You have some kind of philosophies on maybe when it's too early to take in outside capital. How do you think your approach with Starburst and capital has helped set up the company, in maybe a more stable and more methodical kind of, journey?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And I would do the early part of Starburst over again in a second, the same exact way. So we started, for your listeners' benefit, we started without raising any capital at all. And we were actually bootstrapped. And one of the things that I love about that is that we had complete control without any scrutiny or questioning over the changes that we made, from one day to the next. And I think in those early days, you have to be very flexible, very open to, the term pivot gets thrown around a lot. I think pivot often reverts to or refers to giant changes that you might make later on in the business. But I would argue that in the early days of the business, you're pivoting almost every week, as you learn more information from your customers. And so being bootstrapped allowed us to be very customer centric, allowed us to adapt to what we were seeing and make a lot of little small changes every week without having to justify or explain them to a board or group of investors. It also gave us a lot of leverage later on when we did choose to raise, because at that point we were cash flow positive, we were profitable, and we didn't need the money. And I think in any negotiation, you're always strongest when you have the opportunity to walk away and say, this is not the right deal for me. And so that gave us a lot of leverage, in that process when we did decide to fundraise. So I highly recommend it if you can try it. I do think a lot of founders raise too early, in my opinion, and I get it. The whole journey is hard, so I don't want to pass judgment necessarily, but I think some founders raise money because they need a salary themselves, and I don't think that's the best reason to raise, because you're essentially diluting your ownership and giving up control, for the sake of a salary. And everybody's in a different situation. Maybe they have to do that. But I would say, to the extent that you can try to prepare for your entrepreneurial journey and put some money aside and be willing to kind of go without a salary for an extended period of time, maybe even a year, while you sort of suffer through the early innings of the business, I think you'll be much better off at the end of that year, once you've assembled everything, created real value, and then go on to raise money to scale and grow.